Good evening. My name's Richard Francis Jones, and welcome to circlesix. I'm wearing a suit today because we're going to the Opera House. You're most welcome here. It's lovely to see everyone. And I want to begin by introducing Corey Kenny, who is going to give us an acknowledgement of country.
Hey everyone, so it's nice to be here with you all in Gadigal country tonight. And on behalf of you all, I want to acknowledge the Gadigal people who are the traditional custodians of this land. We should also recognise the Gadigal people's continuing custodianship of land, sea and sky country and pay our respects to elders past and present. Our elders are the reason that we're all here today, enjoying this wonderful place. So that's why we pay particular importance to our elders. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. And for those of you who haven't been here before, this is a very special part of Australia Square because it was a former exhibition space, which is why we have this lofty ceiling and the beautiful structure designed by Pierluigi Nervi. And so one of the things we wanted to achieve when we moved in here was to be able to share this space and to maybe restore some of its cultural and exhibition purpose and also invite more people to experience this amazing space. So it's taken us a while to get our act together. And we've now got a website, circlesix.com. So please go and have a look. This is a sample of the website that we have here. And one of the things we really wanted to achieve is creating a venue which was independent of our own studio and could be used by anyone really for a cultural purpose. So here's our website. These are the upcoming events. So there's one today. And we also have Hikaru Fumishahi and Elizabeth Carpenter talking about music and architecture. It's our next event next month. And that is going to include a cello performance from Hikaru, who's that's going to be something really special in here. So you're all most welcome to attend that. And then one after that is Richard Thorpe talking about the making of Parliament House, which is incredible. Anyone who's had a drink with Richard Thorpe will know that he spills an incredible story about the making of that building, which is unpublished. And we're going to record that event, so we're going to have all the dirt on what happened. And also on this website, we will be having all of the previous events in edited video form. What we want to do is archive the events here so that they're available, and hence today's event will be recorded and very special. It is a privilege for us to, I think, be able to share with you the incredible work of Paolo Stracchi and Luciano Cardellicchio. We don't get much more Italian than these guys. But ironically, they're talking about the Australian contribution to the making of the most loved building in Australia. And so Paolo is a senior lecturer in architectural technology at the University of Sydney School of Architecture, Design and Planning. And he holds a PhD in architecture and construction from the University of Rome, Tor Vergata, where he also trained as an architectural engineer. Luciano Cardellicchio is an associate professor of architectural construction at the University of New South Wales and director of the architectural discipline. And he has a background in building engineering, and he leads academic strategy and teaching across the architectural programs. So what a wonderful alliance of the University of New South Wales and the University of Sydney. And we're going to begin with Paolo.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, AJC, for inviting Luciano and me to present our research on the construction of the Sydney Opera House under the splendid, nervy, Pierluigi Nervi ceiling. As many of you might know, Pierluigi Nervi was rather skeptical of Utzon's competition scheme, particularly in relation of its structural integrity and buildability. And in some respect, Nervi was not entirely wrong. Utzon, on the other hand, was not especially drawn to Nervi's architectural language, with its ribbed patterns and structural expression. And in fact, Utzon wanted Ove Arup as his engineer, rather than Nervi, who had been suggested by the Sydney Opera House committee to work with him for the structural resolution of the building. But this is only one of the many stories surrounding the history of the Sydney Opera House. Tonight, however, we are presenting a research that moves beyond individual biography and personal stories. What follows is a short, very short summary of a research project that started 6 years ago on the construction, on the Australian contribution to the Sydney Opera House. And this is a research project that Luciano and I are doing also with Professor Paolo Tombesi from the PFL. So it gets even more Italian here. So 3 Italians working on this. This very fact, in fact, so the role of the contractor was also central to the Sydney Opera House inscription as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And in fact, the listing goes even beyond acknowledging the building's architectural iconography and includes, in fact, its unparalleled construction and collective creativity of architects, engineers, last but not least also the builders. However, for the past 50 years, attention has been mostly centered on 2 key figures, of course, Jørn Utzon, the architect, and Arup, the firm, or Ove Arup, the founder of the firm. The story of the building has also often been framed, as we all know, through the conflict between Utzon and the Australian government, and Utzon's final departure from the project. And also eventually, his replacement with Peter Hall and so on. And this is the story. These are all the books and papers published on the Sydney Opera House in 50 years. But there was very little in registering, in recording, the construction history of the Sydney Opera House. So now, coming to the project itself, what we all know very well is that it took 5 years of intense hard work for the engineers at Arup in London to find a structural solution capable of realizing Utzon's beautiful but unbuildable vision for the Sydney Opera House. During this process, they had tested at least 12 different options, trying different geometries, ellipsoid, parabola, circles, all combined with different tectonics and structural systems and materials, concrete, steel, then back to concrete, and so on. Eventually, in 1962, a spherical geometry provided a workable geometrical solution through which the sails, the roof structure, could be calculated at the point with some confidence. The geometrical solution drastically transformed the outline of the roof and changed its structural definition. The organic thin freeform shells were transformed into a series of classic symmetrical ogival vaults made of solid rib cages, each standing very elegantly on this single vertex, as you can see from this image. What led to the acceptance of this radical, controversial, especially at the beginning, solution was that it provided a clear construction strategy which had been missing, lacking to the very point. In fact, the spherical triangular sectors that form the vaulted roofs could now be, as you can see from the image there, could be divided into a series of repetitive ribs, which in turn could be segmented into a series of parts. From there on, the so-called spherical solution paved the way for an ideal mass production process to precast repetitive segments which could be assembled on site like a giant three-dimensional puzzle. While for sure brilliant, the spherical solution was not without its challenges. But for too long, the myth of this solution has somehow oversimplified the narrative of the Sydney Opera House construction, and with it, the role of Hornibrook, the Australian contribution to it, not only in the construction, but also if you think on the design of the building. And here, now, even by quickly skimming through the many photographs that we have online, that we have available to us, taken by Max Dupain or David Moore, we all know so well, just by looking at this photo, that we can recognize the extraordinary challenges that Hornibrook had to overcome in order to build Utzon Arup spherical solution. And of course, the challenges, if I go back, by looking at the photo, you can start imagining, how they organize the layout, the site, the precast concrete factory on site, and also how you were, how you had to handle and move all those giant pieces forming the roof. Now, in 2020 with Luciano, I embarked on an archival research project to locate what remains in the archives about the construction of the building. And at the State Archive, we found a set of shot drawings made by Hornibrook for the construction site. Precisely, we found 5,300 shot drawings, documenting site layouts, temporary structure, means forecasting, and so on. In addition to these drawings, we also found all the site minutes and the weekly reports documenting the entire construction process from 1962 to 1967. And here you can see how we started by organizing this documentation. And also in this image there on the right, you can see this is like a workflow that shows you how the drawing done by Hornibrook and tested through their prototypes they were doing in the factory were actually like informing all the drawings done in London by Arup. So there was this very, very intimate integration between the engineer at the point and the contractor. And this was all done by reconstructing the date, the issuing, and the variation of all these drawings. We were also able to find and to document for the very first time through 47 drawings. We are missing a picture there, but that's fine. Through 47 drawings, the legendary telescopic arch, and on the side the image is missing, but 109 drawings documenting the casting yard of the Sydney Opera House. Now, we often forget that the Opera House was not just a complex project, but also a complex project built on a complex, unique site, surrounded by water on three sides. Utzon also placed the two halls next to each other on a podium and toward, of course, the water, the bay. His design, the only one to do so in all the entries for the competition of the Sydney Opera House, liberated the southern area of the site while condensing all the building volumes towards the water. This decision, while favoring the building monumentalization and its iconic presence on the harbour, also saturated all the available width of the site with a podium. This limited, of course, the space for material storage and circulation across most of the site, making on-site logistics a crucial aspect of the construction challenge. Hornibrook, even before signing the contract, began issuing specific drawings to address this very pressing issue, so to organize the construction site across the podium. This was one of the very first time we were using in Australia what we call today the early contractor-like involvement, if you like. On the left here, you can see one of the very first sketches made by Hornibrook to rationalize Bennelong Point with the casting yard, the storage areas, the production for the tiles, and so on. Very simple sketch here. But the very first set of drawings issued by Hornibrook were this initial section here, which showcased the contractor's immediate attempt to improve the north to south site connection with these elevated trusses built on a railing system to house 3 Babcock Waits French cranes. These were the largest cranes available at the time, produced in Lyon, in France, and shipped to Australia. Now, often recorded in history, this is not a new data that we have, these cranes had a maximum hoisting capacity of 10 tons. This very datum determined the maximum weight and consequently the dimensions and eventually the final look of the parts making the assembly of the Sydney Opera House roof. This is just showing you the intimate, very profound connection that you have between the final look of the Opera House and these construction requirements. So once erected, this giant multidirectional steel machine with its moving cranes became one of the most spectacular material expressions of the construction process. Yet, it should also prompt us to reflect on the construction of the Sydney Opera House as an exceptional context, spectacular indeed, but also extreme in terms of site condition, construction methods and means, logistics, and site organization. To understand this a bit better, we have highlighted three main challenges, each connected to a specific part of the Sydney Opera House and a specific frame of the construction, and we have defined them through three loci: sails, octopuses, and telescopic cranes. We hope that the brief description, a very brief description of these parts will enhance our understanding and appreciation of the building. And I always say it's like my wife, it's very easy to love, but sometimes very difficult to understand. So, okay, so we have to analyze the roof as we have to start from the octopuses. They are also known as side shells. And these are essentially like a series of tripods placed between the main spherical sails and which act as a supporting structure for the main sails. In particular, the octopus, and this is all the octopus you can see here in this one, for example, that is under construction. There is one that is already completed in between the main sails, and so on. In particular, the octopus legs presented a twofold double challenge. They needed to form a self-standing structure capable of supporting the main shells in equilibrium, while also offering a smooth transition between the profile of the side shells and the main shells. And that's why they had this sweeping kind of curving section. Now, in this beautiful photo that you see here, stage, of course, is a photo they staged and taken by Max Dupain. You can see they weren't even working that day because it was raining and so on. So it's a beautiful photo, but of course it's staged. But you can start appreciating the artisanal kind of degree that you had for the production of the octopus parts or precast segments. And here you can see all the octopus parts is made by as an hybrid construction between cast in situ parts and precast elements, and then at the end there is also like another cast in situ part. But for now we want to focus, and Luciano will explain this a bit better, all the casting process. But for now we want to focus on another challenge regarding the assembly of the whole octopus. Much like building a house of cards, constructing the octopus requires all the parts to be positioned in their final location before they could be secure with post-tensioning cables, additional casting, and final bolting. The challenge was to design a temporary structure with a great degree of flexibility, a challenge made even more difficult by the fact that the podium was still open. As a result, Hornibrook designed a telescopic scaffolding system. You can see this in the image. The telescopic columns allow reaching the bottom of the stage pits, while flexibility was introduced by adding hinges at the top and at the bottom of the columns, and also incorporating soft springs at the top. Overall, looking at the image, you can also picture this as an octopus standing on a wobbling like a jellyfish. The actual point of contact between the temporary structure, the props, and the actual structure, so the leg of the octopus, was achieved through an ingenious system of steel cradles. This system was devised in a way that could be adjusted to follow the carving section of the octopus legs. And in these very beautiful shop drawings, we can see how the cradles worked, housing both the segments of the octopus in the pink and the very first rib of the main sails. Now, we also have to consider that each part was large and heavy, thus their precise positioning in space had to be determined from the very, very beginning. And here is a beautiful hand-drawn illustration showing this very procedure step by step. Now, once everything was in place and ready to be fixed and secure, what was needed was, of course, a spanner to fasten all the nuts and bolts together. But commercial spanner wasn't perfect, or wasn't ad hoc for this, so they had to design a big spot spanner to secure all these parts together, just to give you the degree of the design the Hornibrook had to do, to secure all these parts together. Now, once we start piecing all these preliminary observations together, we can begin to appreciate that the construction of the Sydney Opera House was in fact, as expected, a highly complex process, one that constantly required adaptation, adjustments, and problem solving on site. We are already starting to debunk the myth of the spherical solution. In fact, the reality goes well beyond the familiar story that presents the construction of the Sydney Opera House as a simple three-dimensional puzzle.
What we have seen so far is a building site far from the repetitive manufacturing logic suggested by the spherical solution. Now, we can dive into the construction of the main sails to see how this eureka moment translated actually into reality. First of all, we need to address the challenges of the production of the sail segments. The first point to stress is their number. 2,400 concrete elements needed to be produced. The second substantial challenge was that every single rib of the main sails was made by an assembly of elements showing different cross sections. From a solid eye at the pedestal level, each rib sections open up to a Y-shaped section at the top. Stressing these two major aspects, the number of pieces and their geometrical variations, it is easy to imagine that the open-air factory invented by Hornibrook on-site to manufacture all the precast segments was, in fact, an advanced and pioneering production line. The Australian know-how is embodied in the design of these 10 molds used to produce the rib segments. The appreciation of the complexity of the production workflow can be grasped even further by looking at all the sub-requirements for the production of this segment, such to be fast to produce, they had 3-section, post-tensible, scaffoldable, liftable. Therefore, when we start counting and stressing all the different components and requirements contributing to the construction of each sail segment, we can actually see how the spherical solution played out in the eyes of the contractor. The colors here are in fact highlighting all the variations that the segments belonging in the same latitude, on paper identical, had in reality. The Australian molds were developed through this very drawing, which is the tangible testimony of the local knowledge. Specifically, it shows the mold used to produce the first 5 segments of each ribs. And most importantly, it was issued by Hornibrook before signing the contract. This is because at the time, Arup needed to check with the contractor the feasibility of the spherical solution from a construction perspective. The same can be said for this other drawing, which is instead designed to produce segments 6 to 9. Through the reading of this record, it's easy to assess that the degree of detail and complexity of this formwork exceeds what was common practice in the 1960s. More specifically, the customization even extends to the invention of the wheel used to open up the molds. This wheel was engineered and produced by Hornibrook to allow a slow and careful stripping of the bed to guarantee the smooth finishing requested for the concrete. So there's 2 hinge points where basically the molds were not just simply opening, but there is slightly tilting in their parts and then opened for the delivery of the concrete pieces. But to define even further the degree of complexity of the casting yard, let's take a look at how the first 5 segments were produced. The beds consisted of 2 steel trusses topped with R-wood plywood and a layer of polystyrene resin, reinforced by fiberglass. They could open and closed hydraulically. And as I said, the system was designed to ensure careful automatic stripping, a process that took around 15 minutes. In the initial pouring stage, precast bulkheads were used. These bulkheads provided workers with a tangible reference for laying and aligning the ducts later used for stressing cable through each ribs. The first 4 segments were cast together, while for the 5th one, an internal form was required to achieve the Y sections as coming in. After placing the element into the bed, the first pouring occurred. Subsequently, the precast cross bracing was placed on top and connected through the final pouring. The same approach was used for all the other segments that had a Y sections, so from 7 to 12. Here, the adjustable inner form was designed made of 3 parts, 1 at the bottom and 2 telescopic wing. This is start to understand the logic of Hornibrook to make every single part efficient and every single part adaptable. Adjustability is a key word also for the bespoke formwork system designed for the cross bracing. This is the only drawing we found to document this ingenious mold. In fact, one drawing only was necessary because the formwork was engineered to be rotated for casting every single cross bracing despite their changing angles. And you can see by the archival records that, and you can see the molds waiting here to be used, and the fact that they were basically hinged, like 4 branches hinged together. But beyond the fabrication phase, how were these assembled? Were these segments assembled? This image of the construction site shows bustling activities driven by tight schedules and close, very close, working conditions. 2 major tasks were being executed simultaneously: the construction of the side shells, narrated by Paolo, and Octopus with the impenetrable scaffolding, and the assembly of 8 precast sails. The engineering marvel at the center of the assembling process is, without a doubt, the erection telescopic arch, devised by the Hornibrook duo of engineers, Australian Gobert Gore and French Joseph Bretigny. This aerial and movable crane was created to provide temporary support to the sail segment, 1 concrete piece at a time, rib after rib. The aerial nature of this centering, the erection arch, was necessary to avoid heavy and complicated scaffolding that would have interfered with the crane's railings and ground operations. This was not common practice. At the time of the construction, other challenging structures were built around the world, embracing the same formal complexity, but as we can see from the use of traditional scaffolding, not the same construction advancement of the Sydney Opera House. Thanks to the archival material, we found we are fully now be able to understand all the sequencing. The design of the erection arch aimed to gradually follow the spherical geometry of the main sails. For each rib, the arch maintained an open sliver of space necessary to the progressive insertion of the precast components, stacked 1 on top of each other. Once a rib was completed, the arch was relocated to the next position, reopening the gap essential for the insertion of the components of the next ribs. This process was repeated for all the ribs. This distinctive movement of the erection arch was made possible by a series of meticulously designed components and connections, showcasing the utmost engineering ingenuity. First and foremost, the 2 poles were conceived in telescopic section. This design allowed each side of the arch to be extended to accommodate the longest ribs. Secondly, the base of the arch was secure on both sides by an ingenious connection designed to permit the axial rotation of the poles that you see at the back. Basically, and here I'm using this because I'm Italian. This is when it's helpful being Italian, but it's not just a translation in one erection, but the erection arches moves it, extend, and rotates. So all these three different movements were allowed by very sophisticated joiner. This is our favorite, which is the crown of the erection arch, which is a chrome ball joint that, as you can see from the top left corner, it allows that kind of independent movement that follows the spherical solution. The erection arch in general wasn't just the another key points of the erection gear were this beautiful needle beams, and I'm pretty sure everybody can appreciate the detail of the drawing. But these erection gears were customized steel beams that allowed on one side to hoist and to connect the concrete segments in the position. This was designed by, everything was designed by Hornibrook, but the ability to position already in the concrete element in the angle for the erection arch. And then the tiny little detail, which is this one, that connects the erection, the steel beam, the needle beam with the top of the erection arch. Imagine doing that, imagine fixing and connecting those two steel parts at 50+ meter high. The final piece of the erection gear, as I said, were all the needle beams that you can see in this beautiful picture. The needle beams secure the concrete segments to the adjacent completed rib and they keep the arch in the corrected position during the whole assembly process. After the rib was connected with the post-tensioning, all the needles beam could be removed and the arch moved in the next position. So the needle beam also worked as a form of managing the tolerance and achieving the tolerance of rotation of each rib by sustaining on one side by the erection arch and on the other side on the rib that has been already assembled. So why we care about this, or what does this research reveal? Well, first of all, this research reveals the extent to which the general contractor contributed to the project, not as a builder, but as a designer of processes. Each invention, from molds to erection system, forms part of an integrated approach where construction becomes a form of design. The solutions developed by Hornibrook were not technically fixed. They were design acts, coordinated, optimized, and deeply embedded into the project's logic. Construction here is not execution, but authorship. The second main reason, or the second main aspect that this research revealed, is that we should read the building in a different way. Often the significance of the Sydney Opera House is identified also in its international role, played in the history of architecture as a seed of a design trend that led the creation of complex and sculptural buildings around the world. By contrast, now, through the lens of this work, we were able to identify the national ties that the Sydney Opera House has with the local knowledge that was so pivotal in its completion. Knowledge that was developed by Hornibrook, not so much with buildings, but through the construction of some of the most iconic bridges around the country. For this reason, the Sydney Opera House can be seen today not only as a product of foreign creativity or foreign engineering, but also as a peak of technological innovation in construction that was already here. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very fitting. We should have that discussion in this space where we've so much focused in understanding this building as such an incredible partnership between a developer, a architect, and a structural engineer. And when I say developer, of course, builder-developer. And and this project and your research reveals that on a completely another level, and I think is inspiring way to think about the building, and beautifully illustrated by all the material that you've shared with us, which I think anyone who loves a drawing and a construction photo is kind of completely fall in love with that work. And as beautiful as the Opera House is finished, it seems more beautiful, in revealing, the extraordinary depth of its structure. It sort of lives as an object rather than a form that defines space. It has life, I think, in those drawings and photographs. So, you're happy to take a few questions? Yes?
Just a question about the documents that you've been using, the Hornibrook ones. I did read in Helen Pitt's book about the Opera House that when Utzon left, a colleague of his put together about 5,000 documents and stored them away. Would these be the same ones, or is that a reference to another set?
That set is in the Mitchell Library. That was Utzon's set of drawings. These are Hornibrooks. They're totally separate. In addition to the collection of drawings in the Mitchell, there's also a lot of Utzon documents and photographs and papers.
There's beautiful pictures of him going to Anfield in the Hornibrook headquarter and see the molds being tested as the trial. So it was very lovely pictures to see him in the factory around and seeing how the ideas was tested of the molds.
Thank you for such inspiring research, and it just proves that there is so much to learn about that building, and we will continue to learn the deeper we think about it and delve into it. And it's wonderful that you've had such dedication in searching out this material over such a long period of time. But imagine the other treasures of knowledge that are yet to be discovered in all dimensions, not just in construction, not just in material science, not just in engineering services, not just in architectural detailing and design, in everything. And I think it says to me that it's a moment in our history when we should reflect on the extraordinary benefits that come from the government supporting a public building at no cost. The cost of the building is irrelevant when you consider the benefits, the long-term benefits, not only to culture, not only to the city, to international recognition of this place, but the technology and the development of the arts. There's so much that we could benefit if every generation, we put our minds to producing the best that's possible, like this building.
Thank you, Richard Johnson. Any more questions? If you could just say your name first.
Thanks. I'm Anne Watson. I'm interested in collaborations in the construction and design and construction of the Opera House. And as we know, there were many, and they were very complex. And I'm wondering if you're looking at the way, as a sort of background to your research, the way Hornibrook collaborated with Arup, the engineers.
Yes, the collaboration started for them even we said during the presentation, even before signing the contract, because Arup was they knew Hornibrook. In fact, eventually they said we were very lucky to have Hornibrook in Australia, because probably without them we wouldn't be able to build this masterpiece. Yeah, and yes, and the collaboration started just after the discovery of the spherical solution, because of course the spherical solution was, of course, like a structural solution, but was also, but they had to test that the solution could actually be built. And that's why they engage with Hornibrook. They also engage with Hornibrook to understand where they could actually get the cranes, for example, like from Lyon. So they went to France together. So there was this kind of research that they did together. Now, and eventually, the story is fascinating because Hornibrook started preparing and prototyping the formworks in, what's the name of the, where was it? Enfield. They started prototyping all the formworks in Enfield. And they had to do the prototypes so they could actually produce those drawings. They should have gone to tender. But of course, you can't go to tender with one drawing. This is the point. So they said, of course, now we had to develop now. The system is working somehow, but we had to produce all the necessary drawing to go to tender. And to produce those drawings would have taken probably like 6 months, maybe 1 year. And they said, this is going to take too long. We're already like running out of time with this building, so we had to speed up the process here. So, and that where Arup said to the government, if you want to fast track the construction process, we need to get Hornibrook on board. But at the point you don't go to tender, and in fact the contract between like stage 1, so the podium, and stage 2 is different, because stage 1 was like a fully fixed contract, and stage 2 was actually a cost plus with Ove Arup working as a project manager, and Hornibrook directly commissioned with the construction at that point. So there was this direct kind of contract or like agreement. The government wasn't so happy about it, of course, because you don't have like a full fixed, well, in theory, like a full fixed price for that. But this was the only solution that they had to speed up, to fast track the process, the project. But also was the only, probably was also the only bit that had that know-how, that knowledge that could actually allow the construction of the spherical solution, because as Luciano said briefly at the very end, Hornibrook was a bridge builder. And in fact, when you see the construction of the Sydney Opera House, you can recognize many techniques that were used in the construction of bridges, not in the construction of buildings, because Hornibrook had that know-how. And all the cranes, the centering, the telescopic crane, work more like a formwork, these cantilevering formworks that you have in the construction of bridges instead of buildings. Because it wasn't a scaffolding, it was like this kind of cantilever. And we found also a few drawings of the Sydney Opera House indicating to look at the Commonwealth having a bridge in Canberra. So that was actually the blueprint, or they were sending people to learn, for example, the post-tensioning procedure that would be then adopted for the Sydney Opera House. But that was actually the blueprint, the real, trial for the Opera House. But it was a bridge, it was know-how, and then it was this kind of, and then there was know-how, there was that, and this is why eventually they had to accept Hornibrook as a only kind of builder, possible builder here in Australia, and this is it's fascinating, really.
Yeah. Our dream now is to take all the site minutes and really see how collaboration was playing out. Because in the site minutes you have all the information that you need to understand how the information were flowing, what was the problem, what Paolo was saying. This is our DNA diagram with all the Hornibrook drawings. Part of them, the colors are the problems that the drawings fixed. And you can see the very first one, there's a line that reads pre-planning. All the first ones have been issued by Hornibrook before signing the contract. So now our dream, and luckily I think with AI, there are hundreds of site minutes. Like it was one, the meeting was every week. So we have, imagine for 4 years, that's the amount of information that we need to process. And I think that allows us to be very specific about collaboration.
Luciano, I've heard a lot of people talk about their dreams, but I've never heard anyone have a dream of going through 4 years of site minutes. I was like firmly in the nightmare category, I would have thought. Yeah, John Perry.
Hi. If I understood you correctly, you said that the end of the Arab period looked at the fabrication of the shells and the repetition on what drove the geometry, the spherical geometry, but its subdivision into a series of segments, but didn't appear to take account of the actual installation process. How do you think it would have changed if the installation process had been the driver rather than the fabrication process itself? Because the fabrication took place on the ground, relatively easy, but the installation took place in the air, not so easy.
Great question.
I can ask AI to answer the question, together with all the site minutes analysis, after I train the agent to do that. I think there's definitely, I think the key point there is the site size. So I think we underestimated always in the appreciation of the complexity of the word complex attached to the Opera House. How, as Paolo said, complex the site was, not just the building, but also the site. So as you can see, the very first attempt is just to realize there's no space here. There's no space whatsoever. So I think you could have achieved a different strategy for assembly and different, like, you know, maybe even bigger components, but not with that site. I think that everything would have been, the logic of having small spaces not only was dictated by the hoisting capacity of the cranes, but also the fact that there was literally no space left for curing. And so, yeah, I think so, but AI might have different things.
It's a great question, but also, you know, there's another factor at play, I suspect, in there, which is just the purity and the beauty of a circular form, you know, and what that delivers beyond even the convenience of prefabrication or construction assembly. James Warwick.
Yes, James Warwick. Look, what a thrill to see such wonderful research, and what a thrill it must have been as scholars to find 5,300 documents nobody else has looked at. And the way that you have brought it alive, and the way that you have understood the systems and processes of such complexity is really impressive. I've seen an earlier presentation, perhaps a year or so back, but it's really great to see it and continuing in this way. It does raise, to me, a very interesting question, and I may not have quite caught what was discussed earlier about Hornibrooks themselves, but it raises the question of the actual processes, or as it were, the biography of Hornibrooks as a firm, and how they emerged to have this capacity, and how perhaps they moved from earlier works which might have been based upon routine scaffolding into this machine system. Of course, one of my favorite Hornibrook bridges is the previous suspension bridge at Northbridge in 1939, a tremendous arch bridge which replaced the original suspension structure. But I think it was done with a conventional scaffolding. So can you just, I may not have caught what you said earlier about what was the blueprint for this project in terms of the machine-based devices on which this was all predicated.
So, I mean, yeah, we haven't done a proper, like, reconstruction of Hornibrook story here yet. That's the probably next phase here. But yes, but the story, you know,
well, I think the story bridge. What I I interviewed. So Julie Hornibrook, she's a great fan of this research, and she allowed us to get into the technicality and interview Jørn Hornibrook, which was a nephew of Sir Manuel. And I think in this conversation, Sir Manuel just said, like, oh, we were very good with precast concrete. I think that, so anything that delivered, so I think the Jolly Bridge, I think is a good blueprint in terms of understanding, you know, a steel structure with steel arches that encased with precast components that have different geometry. I think that to me is the one, but then you can analyze, the beauty of this is that all the Hornibrook papers, we located them. All the Hornibrook papers, we located them, and they are in Brisbane, so they are in the State Library of Queensland State Library, so we know where they are. But also the machinery in the Story Bridge, you can see how the machinery used for the Opera House were very similar to the machinery, all the hoisting ones, the small ones, yeah, in the Story Bridge. Yeah. So we haven't done the kind of like the mapping of, we know where the papers are and we know how to kind of trace that back, but there is definitely an ability. Well, I think if you Google Hornibrook and the Science Dictionary of Australia says Hornibrook clearly stated was famous to be able to invent creatively false work. So I think that was the kind of like the signature. Again, we don't know where that kind of thing was trained, but that's the signature element of it. And this is also because there was an engineering department. So Gorbet Gore was an engineer. So it was a builder, there was like contractors with an internal civil engineering department.
And what we also know, it's not related to Hornibrook almost, but that eventually this part, all this railing system here, was apparently, we had to verify our fonts here because we had to verify this, but it's very cool. Yes, was actually used and repurposed for the construction of the Anzac Bridge, eventually. We had to verify this information, but it's possible. It's possible that.
We believe in the source.
Yeah, we believe in the source.
Apparently there is a picture.
Apparently there's a picture, yes.
Knock at the door.
Thank you. Well, I think we should wrap up. Please feel welcome to stay. There's plenty to drink and more to eat, and engage with our speakers more informally. I think this has been an exceptional presentation and a revelation of a building that we all thought we knew and loved. You know, you think about the Opera House, and the background is a noise about controversy, argument, and contest. And yet, what your work in particular reveals is an extraordinary collaboration and innovation and creativity between architects, engineers, and builders working together. And, you know, it's like the Holy Grail to achieve that. It's, like I said, a lot of designers in the room. It's impossible. You know, we still haven't found a way to work together to make something exceptional and to drive innovation. And so maybe that's still yet to be found. But could you all please put your hands together for a crowd?